All right, welcome back, everybody. I've been doing a lot of Tom Clancy books lately, and well, basically any book I can think of talking about, because I uncovered the fact that didn't really uncover it. I've known it for years, but I did a little more research and solidified the mental health benefits of reading fiction, and there are a ton of them that include fewer cases of depression, the ability to understand and empathize with others much better, fosters creativity, all kinds of mental health benefits. There's a video on my channel if you're curious. But it occurred to me I had not talked about one of the books that made myself a lifelong reader, and I know Bill here probably even more so. That most people have read, but usually when you see a discussion about it, it's about the movie. I don't want to talk about the movie. We're going to talk about the books, the Lord of the Rings. I want to say trilogy, Bill, but it's really 5-part series now.
It, okay, so I really, Tim, I know you're going to geek out about this in a good way.
Oh, here.
The Lord of the Rings is a single book. It was published in England as a single book. Word of mouth spread its popularity to the United States. Copies were bought, and I don't want to cast any aspersions on anyone, so I can't exactly remember the publishing company, and I don't want to say, well, it was this company that did this, but the publisher in the United States, the original publisher of the Lord of the Rings, straight up pirated it. Just said, I'm going to pirate this, and I'm going to see if it's as popular as people say. However, rag pulp is this much a pound. I'm not going to invest in 1,000 pages or more in this book, even with a small typeface. So Tolkien, of course, divided the Lord of the Rings into books, much as the Bible is divided into books, and we can touch on the religious aspects. But
Dragonlance Chronicles, right? It's
yeah,
divided into books. I mean, there's
it,
3 books in one. A lot of books together.
exactly. So the books of the Lord of the Ring are the Fellowship of the Ring, the Two Towers, and the Return of the King, and its associated appendices. The U.S. publisher saw this and said, "Well, that I can just cut this right here, and I can put out this Fellowship of the Rings book and see if it's pot." And of course, it exploded in popularity. It's incredibly popular with I would say at the time, probably a more narrow focus than it gradually grew out to. But isn't that the way? I mean, you didn't have housewives and moms reading Tom Clancy the week The Hunt for Red October dropped. It was naval warfare experts and Pentagon employees, right?
And
So
Reagan, I think he had one of the
in
first
Reagan, that's
copies.
right.
Yeah, the first copy.
So the Lord of the Rings isn't a trilogy; it's one book. I have a volume that my parents bought me back in 1992. I believe it was the 100th birthday of JRR Tolkien then, and they got me a beautiful volume with color plates by Alan Lee, hardback, red silk bookmark in it. And I love the thing. It weighs about as much as a car battery, but I will use it to read. If I'm sitting around at the house, I will use that as my reading copy. That wasn't the first copy I ever got, but it is all of them in one go.
So
It's
I have that's one of my copies. I have the 5-part series that was put out in leather bound with elven ruins on it and stuff. And
right.
I see them in used bookstores now going for more than my first car. And people look at me like, "Do you actually read that?" I'm like, "You know what? I actually have, but I will tell you, I will read that. But if I have to go, like, I typically when I take my kids places, I wind up waiting in the car, so I always have a book with me.
Mhm.
That one doesn't leave the house, right?
Yeah, I
It's-
I have a fair few books that aren't road reader copies, lest I forget them.
Yeah, I have a paperback version that if I want to take one on the road, and it's kind of a 1960s version because I got like the 8-point type size, if not smaller,
Yeah.
and my eyes can't quite read it. I'm tempted to get it on Kindle so I can expand it out.
The
But
first I'm sorry, go ahead.
one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this is My kids' generation, they're teenagers, have certain books that they read that all their friends have read, and there's not too terribly many. But I remember when I was a kid, there were far more books that kind of everybody had read, but we didn't have YouTube and TikTok and
Mhm.
9,000 streaming channels. We kind of had books, and occasionally you could get the TV away from your dad when there were only three channels.
Right.
So you basically had books and the Atari 2600, and there were only so many hours a day your mom would let you play that. So I wound up reading a lot, right? So, but and a lot of my friends did too. So, but sometimes you read because you're bored. Sometimes you read because you truly enjoy reading. And I think everybody has that transition in life where you go from reading because mom told you to, or boredom, and then you pick up a book that like, oh my god, this is so good, and it kind of brings you into that joy of reading. And for me, this was one of those books that opened up that I identified with some of the characters in ways. I actually wanted to like put myself in their place. Tolkien's writing was sort of so entrancing in ways, I almost want to
Hmm.
say, that it kind of pulls you in and you can see yourself being, a hobbit and
Yes.
struggling, with
Yes.
this turmoil of the ring. And it really did do that for me. I don't know what it was like for you, but for me, it was like, go away. I'm reading. Leave me alone.
Now I have the original set of Ballantine paperbacks that my hippie aunts gave me because way back in 1977, Rankin Bass released a wonderful cartoon version of The Hobbit. I
Yep.
saw it and was just enchanted. And I remember sitting in my grandmother's living room watching this on their massive 19-inch color television set.
Hey man, that was
And
big back in the day.
that was a big TV set. And watching it, I loved it. And these hippies, this is 1977. They
So,
were late
so
stage
this
hippies.
was the copy, right?
That is the copy. That
Yeah,
is that.
I have my dad's set that looks just like that.
Yes, yes. So uh came in a gold foil slipcase.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I'm sitting there watching, jaw agape, and I remember, some, I guess today, if you saw him, you'd say he was a cosplayer, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think they were going somewhere after this, because there's a guy sitting next to me dressed in what today we would call cosplay. And he goes, "Well, what'd you think of that?" Here's an adult asking my opinion. And, I kind of glanced over at my mom and dad who were sitting there watching it too. And I said, I really, really liked it. And the next thing I know, my aunt gives me her slipcase edition of The Lord of the Rings. And well, first she gave me The Hobbit. And I read that over the fall of that year. We saw the cartoon. I got the book. The the book, The Hobbit, just sucked me in. I remember sitting up late at night. I remember one specific night. It was a rainy, bit of a stormy night in Northeast Alabama. And I was just at the point where Bilbo and Thorin's company had found the trolls, the stone trolls, and Bilbo tries to pick their pockets and so on. And it just sitting there in that big, huge, cold house and reading that scene in the book, and it really came alive for me. So when I finished it, my aunt asked me if I liked it, and I said yes. And she said, "Well, here's the Lord of the Rings. This is about the ring that Bilbo finds and what comes of it." And I immediately jumped in, and that took me. In my defense, I was 8. that took me that took me months to finish. Um,
I mean, that was kind of in that same boat. I think I was fifth grade,
mhm.
fourth grade, fifth grade, someplace, and it took me an entire summer to get through the core original one book, now three,
Yeah,
and Hobbit and Silmarillion, that other one, uh,
Cimmerillion.
Silmarillion, came later for me.
Mhm.
But that core three was across one summer. But if my parents were still alive, you could ask them, and they'd be like, "Yeah, that was the summer you didn't come out of your room, but we weren't worried because you weren't old enough for anything to really be wrong, right?" So it
Right.
was like,
And my folks, I remember we had Now, this is a thing that used to happen, folks, of any of the younger generation who's watching this. There used to be door-to-door salesmen of books,
All kinds of stuff.
and
Yeah,
and if
encyclopedias. Just yeah.
encyclopedias. A fellow who was a student at the local college there was selling the 2 volume World Fact Book, and we actually ended up buying it. I wish I still had it,
I think
but
every family had one of those.
yeah, big blue
Yeah,
biblical proportioned thing.
yeah.
But I remember the science section in the second volume ended with discussion of the upcoming space shuttle that NASA was going to develop. But anyway, so I'm sitting there in the living room, and my mom is talking to the fellow, and he sees me reading The Lord of the Rings, and he said to my mom, "How old is he?" And she said, "Well, he's 8. He just turned 8 in January." And he once in a while, I gotta get a dictionary to look a word up, but yeah, I understand it. And he looked at my mom and he said, "I have friends in college who can't get through that." And from that point forward, a light bulb went on with my parents. They would tell anybody. We could be walking through Winn-Dixie or Kmart or wherever, and my mom would just tell people, "This is Bill. He's reading The Lord of the Rings. It's a college level book, you know." So they were quite house proud of the fact that I had dived into these books, and it became a lifelong love affair. I read them almost annually. Almost every year I go back, and I usually start in the fall because that's when I started with The Hobbit. So that's a brief history of myself and The Lord of the Rings.
And I want to key in on something you said. So there was the animated series that drew me to it as well. And if you go back and watch that animated series now, I find it interesting because the animation was just horrid. I mean, by comparison to modern standards.
I don't agree with you,
It
but
was it was artistic in ways, but it just didn't. It was different than anything you'd ever seen. The and when I say horrid, I don't mean horrid in an artistic sense. What I mean is there weren't a lot of frame movements, right? So it was very you have one frame on screen for a while and you have another frame on screen for a while, and there'd be small movements in between them, right? So it was done very inexpensively compared to, say, Fantasia or some of the Disney stuff that was coming out at the time. It didn't have a lot of depth to it. So when motions happened, they were very sort of, and the reason you do that is to keep production costs down. So they were trying to keep it sort of a reasonable cost. But and I think that almost hurt it because people were kind of used to Disney animations at the time, right? Because we're all used to Snow White, Cinderella, and Snow White, and all these classic Disney movies that were still huge then,
Mhm.
because old man Disney was still putting them out. Um, or it wasn't that long ago that he was still involved with some of them.
Right, right.
And But to me, the story drove it so hard that you were just sucked in. So for
Yeah.
me, the reason I got brought into this book or sucked into this book, it had nothing to do with the writing style, although that's solid. It had to do with the compelling story that kind of takes place, the struggle between good and evil, and how can that ring kind of turn you sort of evil, and do you have sort of sympathy for what's the crazy guy? I'm drawing a blank. I'm so terrible with names. The guy that had the
For
ring on for far too
Gollum,
long.
for Gollum.
Gollum, yeah. So you kind of feel bad for Gollum after a while, right? Because you see
You
what.
do. And I mean, Tolkien makes such a beautiful point about that when he is explaining the history of the ring to Frodo when there's a 17-year gap that's explained in like 3 pages in the Fellowship of the Ring, right in the beginning, after Bilbo's birthday party and his disappearance. Gandalf is gone and has had an adventure worthy of an epic novel itself in today's terms, where he goes and he digs through the scriptorum in Minas Tirith and finds out that simple little tricky ring that Bilbo had is Isildur's bane, and he's telling Frodo this, and he's explaining the lead up to the point where over the years he had gradually coerced Bilbo into telling the truth, and tells him, he explains to him about getting the ring from Gollum, and what an awful thing that Gollum was, and how, Gollum was probably well over 1,000 years old. And um Frodo says to him, and it's a very poignant scene, and I'm not going to do it justice, ladies and gentlemen. If you have not read The Lord of the Rings, read it for moments like these, if nothing else.
Which don't make it into the movies. I don't want to talk about
Which
movies,
don't make it into the movies.
There's a ton of stuff that does not make it into the films.
Frodo says in a fit of anger and sorrow, miserable creature, I wish Bilbo had slain him when he had the chance. And Gandalf's response stuck with me when I was a kid, and it sticks with me to an adult. And he says, there are many who live that deserve death. There are many who die who deserve to live. Can you give them life? Can you undo their deaths? Then don't be so quick to mete out death to people. Besides, he may yet play an important part in this role. I cannot see all futures. And again, I'm making a mess of it. Tolkien fans are probably going to send me hate mail, but trust me, go read what JRR Tolkien put so poignantly. A man who had seen quite literal hell on earth in World War I, and his feelings on the matter of death in one instance, because there are many throughout the book.
World War I was a brutal war. Nobody even thinks to talk about too much anymore. But I fear part of that history is being lost. But that's a whole separate video. But the other thing about this book that really kind of gets me, and you don't see it in modern storytelling in the same way, is the sort of companionship and everybody kind of working together to solve a problem, right? So, like in modern writing, you get Tom Clancy and Jack Ryan. Jack Ryan solves everything, right? And at one point, Jack Ryan was the federal government.
Yeah,
Which is a little unbelievable. But Tom Clancy pulled it off in a way you're like, okay. You got Jack Reacher. Jack Reacher is a one-man army who solves everything, right? And that's sort of where modern storytelling has gone. But Tolkien digs into that. You do need a fellowship sometimes to solve massive problems. You can't do it by yourself. You've got to have your friends along with you, and he does that in a fantastic way. Such that he has hobbits, apparently, and immortal couple of wizards who go at it a couple of times. We'll get to that in a second. You've got elves and humans and orcs aren't on the human side, but you've got all these people kind of working together to try to accomplish a goal that normally wouldn't work together, right? The dwarves and the humans may not like each other all that much. But in this case, they're pretty happy to kind of work together because it defeats the evil.
He even, I was just going to say, he even addresses the one hero striding out in the White Council towards the early part of part one of the Fellowship of the Ring. After hearing Gandalf talk about the nature of the ring, who Boromir talking about, he has dreamed of Isildur's bane. Hearing Elrond say, I was there. I begged Isildur to cast it into the fire. Bilbo, there's this moment of silence, and Bilbo breaks it by saying, well, I guess there's nothing to be done for it. I'll get my sword and I'll get my chainmail and I'll take the ring to Mount Doom and dispose of it. Sorry for making a problem, guys. Let's go. And everybody just turns and looks at Bilbo, because at this point, Bilbo is over 100 years old. And he's literally standing up to volunteer, not to be a member of the Fellowship. The Fellowship hasn't been formed at this point. There hasn't been a suggestion of 4 halflings, a man of Numenor, a man of Gondor, an archangel, an immortal elf, a redoubtable dwarf going out and doing this. Bilbo just steps up and says, okay, well, I created this problem, so clearly I've got to fix it. And Tolkien, in the gentlest and most poetic way possible, steps back from, you know, Bilbo the Barbarian and says, hang on a minute. Hold on a second. Most esteemed Hobbit, you've done more than enough for us. So,
Yeah, and then the fellowship gets formed from there. But
mhm.
the that was the other thing I wanted to talk to somebody about. So there's the book gets, I don't want to say criticism, but some people I've talked to in life have been reluctant to try to read it because Tolkien was a there's a lot of religious overtones to it.
Oh yeah,
Um,
it is an implicitly Christian work.
mhm. And so as a result, some people are like, oh, I'm not going to read that. But when I first read it, I mean, yeah, it's there, but if you don't really look for it, it doesn't really leap off the page, right? It doesn't beat you over the head with it.
No, it doesn't. It is an exceptionally subtle shading
Mhm.
on the book, or I should say, illuminating on the book. There are significant dates in the calendar of the Lord of the Rings that match up with holy days.
Yeah.
Um, but you don't come away at any point in the book if you approach it with an open mind of going, oh, I get it. Frodo's Jesus and Sam's John the Baptist. Okay, sure
Yeah.
thing. Because Tolkien stated himself, I distinctly dislike allegory. He did
Mhm.
not, and he wasn't writing a religious allegory. He was a Christian man writing a book. His worldview, his understanding of the world, the framework through which J.R.R. Tolkien viewed the world was, well, as a Christian person.
And as somebody who's written a couple of books, and you've written works in the RPG space, you write what you know, right?
Exactly.
It's not some of these things can't escape your brain, and be like, okay, I'm going to turn that part off. And I grew up Catholic, and some people will pick on me. It's like, oh, you're anti-Christian because you wrote this book about a Catholic priest that became a serial killer. I'm like, no, that has nothing to do with it. It has to do with questions that kind of popped into my head as I grew up when I was a kid
Mhm.
in the Catholic Church. And I think that's kind of what Tolkien did, where I think even my book has more to do with religion, and it literally turned a priest into a serial killer than this one does. You kind of have to really look for it, and there's a few ways that you kind of see it in that. You've got these different planes of existence where you've got sort of the elven group and you've got this other group, and you can kind of think of them like heaven in different areas, but in a certain way, at least more than Dante did. Well, Dante had a whole different story structure, but
Right.
um, the other thing about it is you do have these wizards who are essentially archangels, but I
Yes.
think the way they pull that off, the way Tolkien does that, is he makes them sort of all powerful, but not really all powerful, right? They have certain limitations to it, but you can't really kill them in a sense. Maybe you could describe it better because you're much deeper in this lore than I am. But
So the Maiar, the servants of Eru who were sent to Middle Earth, uh, Gandalf, Saruman, Alatar, Palando, um, and I'm sorry, fellow Tolkien aficionados, you'll have to lambaste me in the comments. But yes, they were sent in the First Age to Middle Earth to teach. And most of them, Radagast, I almost forgot Radagast the Brown. Um, they kind of wandered off and got on their own tracks until he betrays the White Council. Saruman is the wisest. Gandalf calls him the wisest of my order. Gandalf puts Saruman above himself in terms of wisdom, but all of them, all of them are stewards, not 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 mighty sorcerers. These are not, and anyone who doesn't know me, if you're looking around my studio, yes, this is the stuff I play role-playing games with, and I'm,
all the time.
D&D. Um just every once in a while. But
5 nights a week on his channel.
but Gandalf his magic. And I recall an article in an early Dragon magazine. I think it was Rob Kuntz wrote it, or possibly Gary. I'll have to ask Rob, but it was titled Gandalf was a fifth level druid.
I remember that.
And
I
and it
would have
caused
put him much higher than that, but yeah.
exactly, it caused a lot of stir, but Gandalf really doesn't do that much mechanical magic that you would recognize from a D&D game. But that wasn't get Gandalf could have spell blasted his way across Middle Earth, slaying armies of orcs, and walked right up to the Black Gate in the Morannon and called down Sauron, and and demanded he show himself. The problem was, even if Gandalf was wielding the One Ring, it was part of Sauron. It was Sauron's poison in the world. And Gandalf, after he fights the Balrog, which is effectively his demonic equivalent. Gandalf basically fought his evil twin when he fought the Balrog in the mines of Moria. Of course, they fell into the deep pool and ran back up the inside of the mountain.
Epic battle, by the way. And
incredible battle.
The movie does not do that justice, in my opinion. But I'm not sure how much better they could have done, but it just does not really do it justice.
So, I mean, Gandalf talks about days of fighting the Balrog in the dungeons of Moria. I mean, you want to talk about an epic D&D fight. I mean, can you imagine that on the tabletop, right? So here he goes, and he dies. The effort, he destroys the Balrog. The effort kills him. God, Eru, sends him back. He says, "Look, there's still work to do. There's still work to do," and sends him back to assist. But even coming back as a resurrected spirit, mightier, and Gandalf would probably say humbler and sadder than he was before, he still doesn't become the one to steer things, because that isn't the purpose of the wizards. I'm sorry, I've rambled on, Tim.
No, that's okay. So the other thing I was trying to think about before I started reaching out to people to do this video was the fantasy genre of fiction books is a large genre. There's a lot of people who read it and will almost not read anything else, right? They're like, they're fantasy readers and that's it. And that's great. Everybody has something they enjoy. And the modern fantasy market is a little bit different, but I was trying to figure out, was there a fantasy group of novels that actually predated this? And I couldn't come up with one. I almost couldn't come up with anything that really was not even epic in scale, but just sort of fantasy-ish until you kind of get past this stuff and into sort of the pulp fiction era after, during and after World War II. So throughout the 40s and 50s, because this stuff predate. I mean, when did this come out? I'm going to have to look up the original release date, and I apologize for that. I should have known that before this started.
That's quite all right, Tim. The Hobbit was 36. I think the Lord of the Rings was 54, but 54. Okay.
Yeah. So it was post World War II. But I can't think of too much that wasn't just straight up Arthurian legends that really predates Lord of the Rings too much.
Your best bet, and I recommend this book to you, and I recommend this to anyone. This book, this author, Lord Dunsany. The King of Elfland's Daughter is an absolutely beautiful story. It's different from the Lord of the Rings. It is, but it is like the Hobbit. It's a Bildungsroman. But Lord Dunsany wrote what today, I think if it was published today, you would call it high fantasy in a Tolkienian vein. And I am certain that Tolkien read some Dunsany.
So the other thing about this series that I think gets to me and shows that this is not only one that is impressive, but one that's never going to go away. I mean, this is going to be studied by, and I don't want to scare anybody off that hasn't read it, but literature professors have written epic dissertations about this series of books. So it is, sort of high fantasy and formal literature, but it's also a page turner, right? So Tom Clancy is never going to be studied in graduate schools for its literature contributions, right? It's just
Nor will
not.
George R. R. Martin.
Nor will
Sorry.
George R. R. Martin, unless it's a lesson of what not to do. But like finish your series. I'm serious. I mean, I think Shakespeare wrote all of his stuff in between the last release George R. R. Martin had and today. Shakespeare could have published everything he had. Sorry, George, if you're watching, but dude, you're like a great bearded glacier. Move it. Come on. Sorry. It's if I had his circulation numbers, I'd be cranking stuff out left and right. It anyway. So, but the influence that Tolkien has had on the industry since its release in the 50s is almost impossible to comprehend, because without it, you don't have Dungeons and Dragons, right? It just doesn't exist. Maybe it does, but I don't think it does in the same sense as what it did, because a lot of that early stuff was clearly influenced by Middle Earth and Tolkien and all that. But you met Gary, so maybe you know more about that than I do. But
it's my understanding Gary loved The Hobbit. That was one of his favorite books of all time, and he found The Lord of the Rings. He thought it was way too long, and he thought it went on far too long. Respectfully disagree with Gary and The Great Beyond.
He might have also been a bit ADD on occasion.
No, AD&D.
AD&D. Oh, I'm sorry, AD&D. Yes, not to pick on Gary. But yeah, I could it be a little shorter? Sure, but by the same Tolkien. No, sorry.
Point for you.
I don't see much in there that I would look at and go, okay, it was dragging at this point or that point. And I mean, I can go through any Tom Clancy book and find 100 pages that needs to come out pretty fast, right? Because I don't care why somebody picked this type of rivet to go on that type of steel. I just don't care. But in these, because he's crafting a world, I don't think he's too long. And if you look at the length of the individual books versus some of the modern fantasy books that are written, he's not even in the contender list for longest. Not even close. Per book, I mean, yeah, if you clump them all together into one, sure. But if you look at some of the Robert Jordan stuff, George R. R. Martin, he's not that long-winded. Tolkien is really not for the epic scale of what he built inside here. He is much more of a page turner than some authors are. So you got to give him credit for that. And maybe that has something to do with when he wrote, because remember back then this was the 50s. I don't know, did he write this on, no, was he on, he might've been on typewriter, but that would have been not the best he had, right?
Yeah, he'd typewriter and longhand, I would assume.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. You don't have an option for word processor. You don't have an option for computer. You don't have an option for voice to text, right? He's hammering this stuff out on a typewriter. And if somebody says, go back and revise, guess what? You get to type out an entire new draft. You don't get to like, oh, let me go correct that one page. No, you get to type out the whole damn thing again. So, he achieved something at a time when it was not as easy to do it at this length. And the other thing that this book, at least to me, as I looked at it as sort of the let me put I've written a few books on it. I'm not comparing myself to Tolkien at all. But when you write a book, it's really difficult to follow through on all the subplots and not leave pieces hanging. And, oh, that character just sort of randomly disappeared someplace. And you kind of forgot to finish things up with them, right? He didn't do any of that. Every story is kind of complete. Every story has an ending, right? It's not like, oh, Gadriel, however you say that. Galadriel. It's not like Galadriel just sort of, disappears on page 300, never to be heard from again, right? Because, hey, you helped us, great. And then he rides off to go get lunch or something and just disappears.
I think the only characters that he does that with, where he doesn't come back around and give us this is this is how things happen. Glorfindel, who meets Frodo at the fort of Bruin. I'm sorry, I'm going so many layers deep right now for people who haven't read the book. But Glorfindel, if all you've seen is the movie, basically Arwen, when the Ringwraiths were chasing Frodo, that was Glorfindel in the book, and he helped rescue Frodo, not Arwen. But
And I cannot stress this one enough. If you have seen the movies and enjoyed the movies and watched them 2 or 3 times, please pick up the book.
I
I
insist that
beg you
people
to pick
read
up
the
the book
books
because
if they
there's so much more depth to it than what you get. Peter Jackson did a great transition and about as good as you're going to find because it is a very complex series of books. But if you have not read them, you need to invest the time, even if you get the audiobook version and just listen to it. It's fantastic.
and the other character that he introduces us to, and then we never ever meet or hear from again, and he tells us it's going to happen, is very early on in the Fellowship of the Ring when the hobbits are out walking at night. And it's at this point in the book, it's literally just a walking party. Unlike in the movie, they're not being chased by the ring wraiths right outside Frodo's door. Um,
Look
and
for a better
I,
movie.
it did. But there is a beautiful. It's one of those Baroque details, like you've seen at least pictures of Gaudi's work in churches, right, Tim?
Sure.
Yeah. You get drawn into a piece of sculpture or something, and it just kind of pulls you in, and it's such a small, wonderful detail. Well, Tolkien has something like that, in that a fox stops in his going and sees the hobbits moving along and says, well, 4 hobbits walking around this deep in the woods this late at night, I wonder what that's all about. And Tolkien specifically says he never found out what it was all about. It's just a silly, wonderful, beautiful scene. So I think Glorfindel and that fox were the only ones that he did not come back around and wrap us up on.
Yeah, well, I mean, some things you do just for sort of comic relief versions, right? And
Right.
just to kind of keep people interested and to say, hey, look, and the one with the fox, I remember that now that you bring it up. I think he was using that as a hook to say, because at that point in the book, you're thinking, okay, well, they're just going on an adventure, blah, blah, blah. I don't think you realize how unusual that adventure is in that world. So I think the fox was used as a way to like, hey, this
That's
is
a
absolutely not normal stuff, folks. This is just weird shit.
that
Right?
yeah, when Mother Nature herself sees you strolling by and she's like, that's odd. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is a wonderful literary device, Tim. That's a good point.
Right, because hobbits are, I mean, they love to eat, they love to drink, and they love to sleep, and that's kind of their three. Oh,
Yeah.
and smoke various things, which we never found out exactly what they were
No,
smoking.
we did, Tim. He says it is a variety of nicotania for all you people out here like,
I knew that
no,
one would set Bill
it
off.
was, yes, it will.
It was not
It's
Florida spring break
it's
time. It was
tobacco.
it was tobacco.
Anyway.
But yeah, the hobbits like to eat, drink, and be merry. That was their whole thing. They loved a good party, and 2 breakfasts, apparently. But who doesn't like second breakfast? I mean, come on. As I get older, I have to avoid it. But who doesn't like second breakfast?
Yeah, our cardiologists and our gastroenterologists, but they're not watching this.
They're not listening right now.
Right.
And as my father put it, they tell me to do things that'll make me live longer, but I disagree. It won't let me live longer. It just makes it seem longer. Of course, he's passed away. So I don't know, that's really good advice, but anyway. But no, the book to me also, it had those little moments that really were literary hooks that kind of went in there to try to drive home the story he was trying to tell and just how unusual this whole thing was. And I also think it wasn't too heavy-handed in the magic side. So, and what I mean by that is like if anybody watching, if you watch my channel or Bill's channel, you probably say Dungeons and Dragons. He didn't get too heavy-handed in the magic side, right? So you can get a magic user powerful enough to like drop a nuke and wipe out an entire army. But he actually got into the struggle of having to win these things by having, your team, having the right group, having trained properly, having organized yourselves, having gotten the right allies. So he gets into the whole strategic side of it too, not just the, hey, you've got a big weapon, go, right? It's not really the way it worked. And I think that might have been a credit to his service in World War One, because in the trench warfare times, there were times when both sides were trying to come up with some silver bullet kind of solution, and nobody could. And you really had to kind of stay organized and stick with your team to really survive the day. And I think the tactics of World War I kind of might have fed him into that. You can't always just find the biggest, most powerful weapon and win, right? You've got to actually
Right.
think this out.
It is certainly possible, and that some people have, I think a knee-jerk reaction by some early literary critics was, aha, he's talking about the atom bomb. The ring is an allegory for the atom bomb. And, then he, of course, he said, once again, I hate allegory. Also, if I was making an allegory about World War II and the atom bomb and all this, he said that the that the men of the West would have been working on their own ring. They would have been trying to create a ring also that was more powerful than Sauron's ring, and that's not what he was what he was talking about. And I think that plays into what you're saying is he recognized you know the idea of one all-consuming power feeding into one's own ego. Now, this gets a little into the Silmarillion. I'm not sure how much you wanted to go down talking
It's
about
Tolkien. It's not just Lord of the Rings. It's all. I'd count all five of them as one chunk at this point.
I think that's probably an astute observation. But in the Silmarillion, there's a basically the first part of the Silmarillion is the Genesis. It's the book of Genesis of Middle Earth. And if your total experience with The Lord of the Rings is the film and then the somewhat less good Hobbit trilogy that came after, there's literally only one throwaway line in The Lord of the Rings where they reference him, and that is when when the Balrog steps out. Later, Legolas says, "A Balrog of Morgoth." If you're sitting there in the theater, well, Morgoth sounds scary. I don't know. Did Morgoth make that thing? Is Morgoth the name of the thing? Morgoth is Satan. He is the Antichrist. It's not Sauron. Sauron is a lieutenant. As awful as he is merely a servant of Morgoth. So it's sort of again it goes back to that case of Tolkien disliking analogies. He wasn't going to have Morgoth as the mustachioed man from Central Europe, and I'm got to be careful about that.
No, we don't want to use that word because then you
can't use that word in the National German Socialist Worker Party acronym.
Yeah. But now the only other one I could think, so that was, I agree with you that was sort of say, I think that's well known. I think even Tolkien said it, and if not, Christopher Lee probably did somewhere along the line.
Yeah. Who was a contemporary of Tolkien's, by the way. So if you've seen The Lord of the Rings, but you haven't watched any of the extras or anything, the guy playing Saruman, not Sauron, Saruman, was a buddy of JRR Tolkien's. So,
and I think holds the record for the most scary thing anybody's ever done to a movie director. And I know you know this story because I've told it to you before, but if anybody doesn't know it, and I don't really want to get into movies too much, but Christopher Lee was in the movie. He was also in, kind of everything else you can imagine. I mean, he was in Star Wars. I mean, he was everywhere, right? But he was also in World War II as essentially the World War II version of special operations.
Yeah, he helped found the SOE.
Yeah, I mean, was not okay, I'm going to deal with the supply line issues in World War II. He was the go kill those people part of World War II.
Pretty much.
And in the middle of one of the battle scenes, Peter Jackson was apparently saying, okay, well, you've been stabbed in the back, and somebody took a dagger and they drove it in your back, and this is the noise you make. And he's like, no. That's not the noise a man makes when you stab him like that. Let me explain it to you. And everybody goes, how do you know that? Well, the first time I did it to somebody, and everybody's like, what? So Peter Jackson's like, yeah, he's
Yeah.
listen to the guy in the robe. He's right. I'm not. We're gonna
He
let it
he
go.
would he would go around the set, and Peter would be saying, I'm not gonna attempt to do Peter Jackson's New Zealand accent, but he'd say, okay, so you say to so and so Durin, and you talk about Durin's band. He's like, no, Peter, everyone listen, it's pronounced Durin. He knew because gosh darn it, he sat next to Tolkien and shared beers with a guy.
Yeah.
Tolkien would have said, no, it's Christopher, it's pronounced Durin,
Yeah. So if I think the movie was made 20 times better by his involvement, just kind of wandering
Yeah,
around the set. But
yeah.
Peter Jackson casted that one correctly. Um, but the other one I wanted to bring up was in particular a book that in there that I don't think gets as much attention as it should is the Two Towers, because it's kind of stuck in the middle and everybody's like, you got to get through it. Everybody likes
Oh
the
no,
beginning and the end, and
I love
but
the Two Towers. That's
but
one of my favorite parts. It's where we meet Eowyn.
but I also think the Two Towers, that big epic battle scene.
Helm's
Uh,
Deep.
yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think anybody that hadn't been in the military and lived through something like World War One could have pulled that off in the epic way it was pulled off in the book.
Yep.
The movie, I get it, you can do it, but in the book, there was such detail in there. You're like, this guy's really seen this stuff take place. It was not, that scene is not for. I mean, I think I probably read it too young, to be honest. But I'm fine, obviously. But okay, well, that might be debatable. But I turned out okay. Uh, but that particular scene was written by somebody who'd clearly seen, the battle of man on man and people killed.
There is it's given I would say the screen time to time in the book is probably about equal. I think although the lead up to it in the film I think is a little overplayed, but the orcs bring forth to the wall of Helm's Deep a blasting fire, and it's essentially it's an explosive breaching charge. They blow a hole in the outer curtain wall of Helm's Deep, and try and flood in. Um, and this ties exactly into what you're saying, Tim. Tolkien in World War One, there was mining and counter mining. I'm not talking about like the little dinner plate shaped things and you hope somebody steps on them. They would sometimes, to break a breach in the line, they would send groups, they would try and tunnel under and tunnel into enemy fortifications and pack them with explosives and then set them off, and then your enemy is confused, hundreds are dead and wounded, and you charge through, um with your own forces into the opening. And I think the breach of the wall of Helm's Deep, Tim, you're 100% right. That was written by someone who probably saw that happen, whether the British forces did it to the Germans on a given day or whether the Germans had done it to the British on a given day.
Some kind of trench warfare or something, right? They
Yeah.
had to overcome a big hurdle to get there, because
Yeah.
in World War One, there was this no man's land that existed for years. And I've actually read some history books about World War One, which I know for people my age is not all that common. But I have a series by a general named March, something like that. I haven't gotten them out in a couple of years. But it was written shortly after the war. It's called The Great War. It's this 6-part series that was written shortly after the war ended. And the reason it was called The Great War is because there was no World War II yet.
Mm.
And it kind of was a telling of what went on. And people you'd lose, hundreds of people trying to gain 5 or 10 feet of space. And then you'd lose them the next day. And it was just back and forth. And he clearly thought this entire thing was just pointless. And one of the things that I think also made its way into at least Tolkien's thinking was that not everything goes as planned, right? Not everything goes the way you want it to, and sometimes you die for no apparent good reason.
Mhm.
Um, for instance, in the war, more people died, not more, but a very large number of people died due to disease, dysentery, and some other stuff, because we didn't have a lot of the hygiene practices that we have today, nor running water, nor a whole bunch of technology to do things. And I think that kind of made its way in there on occasion too, that sometimes just stuff happens, right? And people kind of
Yeah.
don't make it as far as you think they're going to. And I think that sort of disappointment comes in the book too, and it teaches at least a young age. And this is one of the reasons I've kind of taken a focus on my channel of going into fiction books is kids these days, and I don't want to make it a generational thing, but I think people in general don't deal with loss nearly as well as like my parents' generation did. And maybe not as maybe I'm being too harsh, but I think we even get wrapped around the axle now in movies and books like, oh my God, George R. R. Martin killed off my favorite character. I'm like, yeah, but it's his book. He can kind of do
Yeah.
what he wants.
That actor actually got up and wiped that practical effect off, and they laughed, and then
They
he hopped in his BMW and drove home. That's
cashed a check and went, okay, next
yeah.
movie, agent.
Yeah,
Whatever.
exactly. Exactly.
But it's like, oh, we killed off a character. Everybody gets mad. It happens. And I think there were several in here in the series that were sort of deaths that you didn't really see coming that sort of seemed pointless at the time, but kind of happened. Like at the end of I'm drawing a blank. At the end of is the one Sean Bean was playing in the movie.
Fellowship of the Ring.
Yeah, because
Boromir's death saving the hobbits from the orcs.
yeah, had he kind of not rushed in and waited for help, he probably could have survived that, and then the hobbits as well. But he went in and took a bunch of orcs on by himself
Well,
when help was shortly behind him.
I mean, I don't.
He didn't know that, but
I might argue with you about I think I think at that point he was so grief stricken over his struggle with Frodo that he felt he had to redeem himself. Tactical assessment was not foremost in his mind at that point. I don't know that I would necessarily characterize his death as, oh, hey, it just happened and it was kind of pointless. I respectfully.
he okay, maybe I'm wrong, but I just felt like it was one of those deaths that didn't you could have written differently. Yes, he got,
and in that perspective, I'd agree with you. Yes.
And the story would have come out just fine, but he took one out, right? He took a character out, and he took him out in a way that shows that, hey, you go on these big quests and sometimes people die. It's just the way it works. So he was very realistic in his writing in that sense, I think.
And there is, we keep coming back to the World War I focus. I think the most poignant non-main character death. I mean, I still choke. Look, I know Gandalf is going to be back in like 98 pages. Okay. I still choke up when Gandalf falls with the Balrog at the Moria.
He'll be back. It's okay.
I know. There's a scene when Frodo and Sam are taken by Faramir in Ithilien, and he says, "Hey, myself and my troop, we've set up an ambush. There are Southrons coming to aid Sauron, and we're going to delay them. Stay here, stay in cover." And there's a massive battle. There's a massive battle, and a Southron is stuck with multiple arrows, and he's just trying to get away, and he's finally cut down, and he falls just in front of the little hollow where Sam and Frodo are hiding out. And Tolkien doesn't describe Sam as looking at the Southron as evil, as an alien. Good on you, Faramir, and your men. You killed a bad guy. That's awesome. Sam looks at this man and his reflections. He's sad. He thinks, was this truly a bad person who had to come here hundreds of leagues from his home, away from friends and loved ones and family? How betrayed by Sauron was he to be driven to do this, to die forgotten and unloved in a lonely place in a foreign land, and no one will ever know? Sam reflects on the death of an enemy as a great human tragedy, that this was not an evil person. This person was driven by forces beyond his comprehension. He was given a scimitar and put in a line with others and said, "Go north and help the Red Eye." And it is an incredibly poignant scene about what death in combat really is. It's not always glorious. It's not always a storied, remembered thing where people heap praise on you and build a mighty cairn and put a plinth on it, you know?
Well, the other thing I think he does quite well is if you equate it back to World War One, is he shows that it's not always the biggest and strongest that actually win the battle, right? Sometimes it's the little halfling
Yep. Yes.
that actually does everything that he's supposed to do and faces danger even when he feels like he's like, okay, how am I going to get out of this one, right? Here's a halfling that's like the size of a large bat, trying to figure out how to take on an orc.
Yeah.
And sure enough, he figures out how to do it, right? So but I think his experience in World War One kind of fed this, and to me, it produced this between his Christianity, his experience in World War One, and his beer drinking, because everybody enjoys beer.
Everybody
Okay,
does.
maybe not everybody, but he did, and I do. He kind of took all those experiences and mushed it into something that said, hey, I can find 15 things in here I identify with. And I've never talked to anybody who's actually read it who didn't have at least one character they felt they could identify with in some fashion. Everybody has that one, right? Whether it's the wizard or the halfling or one of the fighters, or the dwarf who's just never ready to give up,
Right.
and usually cranky for some reason.
Yeah.
Uh,
Gimli's happiest when he and Legolas have bonded and they're talking about seeing the glittering caves behind Helm's Deep, or about walking back to Lothlorien and meeting Galadriel again. That's, I think, the happiest Gimli gets in the book. He's even angry when he finds out that Merry and Pippin are alive and well.
well,
He chased you all over Middle Earth, you scamps.
I was going to say he's only happy when he's drinking, but that's not really true.
Yeah.
Like he also can get cranky when he's drinking too.
I think you mentioned the halflings, the smallest element, and I've seen this meme before. I wish I had it pulled up, but it was reading the Lord of the Rings as a child means feeling that Frodo is the hero of the story. Reading the Lord of the Rings as an adult is understanding that it's Sam.
Yeah, but it's always a halfling, right? It's one of the
Right.
one of the little
Right.
guys that made the difference.
And when you get to the Scouring of the Shire, I mean, there's another 50 pages of book
Yeah,
that is just about things they do back in Hobbiton, and it's great.
The other thing that I find cracks me up about memes that come out of the book is you could tell some people haven't read it when they use the meme, because it's like, oh, we don't need a king, but it's a person who is a king, and there's like surrounded by royalty. Yeah. It's like there's like everybody up there except one is a member of a royal family, essentially.
Yeah.
And we're talking about we don't need a king, and you're going to use that to prove your point.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you had to tell people one thing that to get them to read this, because I contend that not enough people have read it. They go straight to the movie, straight to the series, straight to Rings of Power, and they're like, oh, I know I know it all. You don't. Okay. I'm not trying to point fingers and say that's a bad thing, because the books exist. You can still read them. They're out there. But there is a ton of depth in these stories that you don't get when you transition to screen, because it's a different medium of entertainment, and you can't really get in Frodo's head and understand just how scared he is by looking at an actor. The actors do a great job of portraying that, but what really causes him to kind of stand up anyway when he's petrified beyond belief, you don't get that part of it. So if I would take any fan and say, hey, look, you've seen it but not read it, I would beg you to pick up a copy and at least read the Fellowship of the Ring. Don't start with the Hobbit. Start with the Fellowship of the Ring. I might
Okay.
be wrong about that. Maybe start with the Hobbit. Bill's looking at me funny. So Bill, I'll let you take that one then. Okay.
Do
On where to
start.
start.
Do start with a Hobbit. Um, do not listen to this man. No, I think you can jump in with the Lord of the Rings. Even go back and read the Hobbit after you read the Lord of the Rings first. But
Just get it out of timeline order. But you
if
know,
if
yeah.
I you kind of get like major spoilers for the Hobbit in the Lord of the Rings, but if I could one thing, um it is poetically beautiful.
For sure.
uh it will break your heart in places. Tolkien's wisdom, um and how he expresses it, is on at all times. You are given the most high definition video system for visualizing the world when you read the book versus watching the films, and that's not a patch on the films.
It's not.
But also, uh in the films, you don't get Tom Bombadil and a really incredible chapter that plays into one of the penultimate battles in The Return of the King. So, if for nothing else, read it for that. Read it for understanding that. Also, Eowyn gets a much more awesome battle scene against the Witch King
It's
in
true. Yeah.
The Lord of the Rings than she does in the film. She gets better dialogue anyway, in my opinion.
Okay. Um, all right. So I'll just leave it at that. But I will say this, that if you do decide to read the books and you want to talk to anyone about it, ask questions, bring up, hey, look, you guys missed this, missed that. You can find Bill on Dungeon Delver on both X and YouTube.
Mhm.
And he does answer pretty much everybody. Um,
I will gladly.
and you can find me on X, Twitter, Threads, Facebook. I'm all over. It's pretty hard to miss me. So if you do have questions, you want to talk to somebody about the book, or you say, hey, look, you guys missed something, or hey, did you think about it this way or that way, or hey, I disagree. Those guys, those wizards aren't archangels. They're something else, right? Although I think Tolkien was pretty clear on that one. So we're going to go back to the source and say, Tolkien
Yeah,
said it. Because the thing about them that I love is Tolkien did not pass away. I looked it up until like 1973.
that is
Um,
correct.
so he was around not that long ago. I mean, I was one, so I obviously never talked to him, but there's people who are still alive today who knew him personally. Um, and a lot of this book has been well studied during his lifetime. So a lot of it is very well known and it is out there. So if you have questions, there's 50,000 references, both on the academic side and the non-academic side. But what I find funny about it is on social media, the book is discussed in ways that you're like, oh no, they meant this. I'm like, no, he didn't. Go look at the stuff that Tolkien said, right? He really didn't. So uh, give the book a chance. Don't pay attention to what people have said online, except for us, because we're telling you the right stuff. Um, just kidding. Give the book a chance, read it yourself, make your own informed decisions on it. Don't trust anybody else's opinion, but you will not, I think, look at it. You want, I don't think anybody, I've never talked to anybody who read it, who walked away and went, well, that was a waste of my time. You're not going to walk away with that. So uh, pick up The Hobbit, pick up any of them, even if you want to get the audiobook, they are out there and they are all very well done. So Bill, I'll leave you the last word and then we'll call it a night.
Um, well, first of all, thank you for having me on your video, Tim. And in conclusion, I would say that The Lord of the Rings is one of those literary landmarks of our time. And it will last. It will be it is it is a great bedrock formation. It's not an edifice built by hands that may pass in the future. This is part of the very foundations of human literature.
I totally agree. And best part is, unlike some of the stuff they made me read when I was in college taking English literature, I actually like this one. Some of the others I didn't necessarily like all that much, except for Dante. I thought Dante was great. But that's a whole separate story. All right. Well, we'll see everybody on the next video. Check out Bill's channel. I'm on his Tuesday night live stream for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, which you do one night a week. You've got Monday nights are just sort of upcoming week. Tuesdays D&D.
Mhm.
Wednesday is sort of potluck.
Yeah.
Thursday
Wednesdays,
is
if I can get my co-host in on Wednesdays, then we're co-hosting Wednesday.
yeah, Thursday is always a guest, or typically is a guest.
Typically a guest, and then
And
Friday nights, Gamma World.
Gamma World, first edition Gamma World, which is just freaking awesome. All right. Well, everybody have a great night, and we'll see you on the next video.